This is a discussion about the second section of Simone de Beauvoir's 1944 essay, Pyrrhus and Cineas. Part 2 is divided into 4 sections, and mostly what she's dealing with here now is not the idea of myself and how I understand philosophical advice for how to live life from the point of view of an individual. Now she wants to bring in my relations with others. So the divisions are others, and again, not the abstract others such as living for humanity, something she dealt with in the first section of this essay, but with concrete others, actual specific others. And then the other headings are devotion, communication, and action. We'll see what those mean as we move along here. Others. She writes on 116, to start with an example. As soon as a child has finished a drawing or a page of writing, he runs to show them to his parents. He needs their approval as much as candy or toys. The drawing requires an eye that looks at it. These disorganized lines must become a boat or a horse for someone, so the miracle is accomplished, and the child proudly contemplates the multicolored paper. From then on, there is a real boat, a real horse there. By himself, he would never have confidence in those hesitant lines. I have grandchildren, as you may know, and they do artwork for me and their mom all the time. And we get these pictures, and there's all kinds of lines and dots and colors, and we hold them up and we say, "That's really great. What is that?" And my grandchild might say, "Well, gee, Pa, can't you see? There's a boat, and there's the ocean, and there's birds flying around." And really, I just see a bunch of lines and some colors and dots. But I say, "Oh, I see that now. That's fantastic." And my grandchild will beam and run back and try to make me another picture. That's exactly what she's talking about here. We have an innate need for recognition from others, to give confidence to ourselves. Example I like to use is, to ask, what's the most exciting thing that could happen if we go to a big sporting event, like it's a favorite team, a football game, and the home team, it's a playoff game, and we're there, and it's really exciting. What's the one thing that you could watch people really lose their minds with joy and excitement when it happens? A touchdown? Maybe. Great play? Perhaps. No, when they see themselves on the Jumbotron, on the big screen, that's when they just lose their minds, and they're texting their friends and saying, "Look at that. I'm recognized. I'm here. I knew I was here. But when I saw myself on that Jumbotron, there's something of validation about that." Now she goes on, "Undoubtedly, we do not try thus to change all the instants of our lives into hard diamonds. We often seek to accomplish our being without help. I walk in the country, I break off the stem of a flower, I kick a pebble, I climb a hill, all that without witnesses. But no one is satisfied with such solitude for his entire life. As soon as my walk is completed, I feel the need to tell a friend about it." And this is 1944, long before selfies, long before Facebook and Instagram posts where we show the world what we're eating for breakfast and who we're hanging out with and what's behind us on the street or in the mountains. We need to share. We have this need for others to help us be ourselves and to come to some kind of grasp of ourselves. Well, okay, how about a kind of devotion to others? Can we find meaning in devotion to these others? That we need. And this section, she deals both with being devoted to others and to God. The question she says, though, puts before us is, when we say we're devoted to others, I live for my marriage, or I live for my children or my parents, or I live for my community or my workmates, are we devoted to others, or are we devoted to our own projects, which include others as necessary for that justification and that validation of our projects? But are we devoted to them, or are we devoted to them in the sense that we're devoted to our projects and they play a role in those projects? Can we even really know the will of others so that to which we're devoted really is the other? because the other is what they will, what they desire. Can we really know their will? She says on 124 and elsewhere, and I just want to underline this because it's really important, a key word, it's not on the slide, but a key word for Simone de Beauvoir is ambiguity. So it was a word that came up in the discussion of fallenness and Heidegger's Being in Time, but it was a kind of a murky term there in many respects. But for Beauvoir, this is incredibly important. Her book devoted to ethics is called An Ethics of Ambiguity. Ambiguity is important, and what ambiguity is us. What does that mean? We are the ambiguous beings. On the one hand, we are freedom, or which is a synonym, a transcendence. That's what we are. And we are facticity. And we are objects for others. We can't not be either one of those, but one of those is freedom and one of them is not. One of them seems like it's under our control and one of them does not. So we have to live out our existence in this inescapable kind of ambiguity. To be ourselves, we need others, but others prevent us from time to time from being ourselves. They put up roadblocks. How do they do that? Because they're free beings too. They're making their choices and decisions. They have their projects that sometimes are at odds with ours. So she gives an example of some things like, can we really show or expect from others gratitude? That word gratitude comes from a Latin root, grace, gratia, grace, meaning freedom. And she's asking this question in the context of something she wants to get at in a minute, is whether, how really do we affect others? Can we, in our freedom, touch on the other that's a freedom, the other that's transcendence? Can we really get all the way to that other person by our free choices? So this is a problem of gifts. Can we ever really give or receive a gift? Is there really such a thing? And now if you Google philosophy and gift, you're going to find a lot of discussion in recent decades about this idea, because asking about whether a gift is possible is finding out something about ourselves. What's going on in gifts is disclosive about something fundamental in ourselves. You might not have noticed that. You think that's just a sidelight of our human interactions. Sometimes, for whatever reason, we give a gift. Sometimes, for whatever reason, you're at a restaurant. When we used to be able to go to restaurants, you got good service, you left a gratuity, a gift. You get the bill for your food. That's something you owe. That's a deal. That's a bargain you made. I'll eat this food and then I'll give you some money in return. But a gratuity is, at least in principle, supposed to be a gift, something over and above, not required, freely given. Now, I'm not sure that really is the way it works out in at least in American culture. I think a tip is actually expected. It's not a gift. It is a requirement. It is an obligation. Other countries don't look at tipping the way we do. They already add a service charge onto your bill. It's part of your bargain. I pay so much for the food. I pay so much for the service that I get at the table. But think about gifts. Think about not in terms of a tip, but gifts at the holiday time, or in the context of a class. Can a student give a gift to a teacher? Well, a lot of times we have rules against that because we realize it's very difficult to do that. If you gave a gift to a teacher and other students noticed you do that, there's going to be questions. Was that really a gift or is that a bribe? Even if you look at me with the most sincere face and say, look, I really just appreciate everything you've done for me. I'm giving you this gift. Did you give me something that does not require obligation on my part? Because that's what a gift would be. Otherwise, it's a deal. Otherwise, it's a bargain. Well, when you give me that gift, you are giving me an obligation at the same time to at least consider how I treat you going forward, given that you've given me a gift. How does that enter in? Even if I struggle to be as objective as I can, let's say, with your grading, it's too late. You already gave me this object, and it can't leave my mind. It's something that I have to grapple with. I'm obliged to think about this. Even at holiday times, when we think about gift giving, we're always trying to be sensitive to give equal valued gifts to each other. If I give you a very valuable gift and you give me a not very valuable gift, we feel a tension there. Like, oh, I'm happy that you gave me a gift, but shouldn't you have given me a gift like around the same value of the one I gave you? Or if I give you unexpectedly a gift that's way more than we normally give each other, you're going to feel an obligation. You did not spend that kind of money or whatever. You're going to feel that. You're going to feel that pinch. You're going to feel an obligation. And even just in gratitude, if I give you a gift and you fail to show me excitement, enthusiasm, you didn't think as highly of the gift that I thought very highly of, I feel kind of cheated. If we send off a gift to our kids and they don't, send us a thank you, at least a thank you text, we gave them a gift. It was free. It was not meant to oblige. But if we didn't get the thank you, we kind of feel it. So it comes into this discussion of whether we can really do anything for or against another person in their freedom and in their transcendence. And what she's trying to get at with this discussion is the other person, the freedom, the transcendence, is something we really can't reach or control. We could control the facticity of others in some ways by grading them or paying them or punishing them physically. But we can't really get through to the other person. She even has this discussion that's maybe a little difficult to agree with. She said, well, you can't really harm somebody by killing them. I mean, because if you killed someone, it's not like they would be there going, oh, rats, now I've been harmed. to her, the atheist, there's nothing left. So she doesn't think you could really harm the other person. But that view entails that our freedom is a kind of an absolute that's not relativized by what's going on with us. It's a complicated idea. She says on page 124, even under torture, man is free. And Sartre, her compatriot and fellow philosopher, said, even on the rack, man is free. In a torture device, man is free. You say, well, I had to give up the information. They were torturing me. It really hurt. Well, you didn't have to. You could have held your peace. Yeah, but they would have killed me, or they would have, or even at work, they would have fired me. I had no choice. There's nothing that could be done. That kind of talk, the existentialists claim is bad faith. We're saying something we know not to be true, that when we give up the information we chose to make the torture go away, the physical pain go away, but we didn't have to be moved like that. We couldn't be fully controlled from the outside like that. It's a big claim, this view of freedom. It's something that both Beauvoir and Sartre wrestled with in their careers. Beauvoir wrestled with it earlier, Sartre later, but it's a kind of a big claim. Now, what about that? So if I'm free, so are you. I'm a transcendence, I'm a freedom, so are you. So I can't harm you. So, for instance, if I keep you impoverished, you can't blame me, right? Because how you respond to that impoverishment is a free choice according to them, right? If I can't get all the way through to you by keeping you impoverished, then how am I responsible for you? But Beauvoir rejects that excuse. She says, one must not believe that I could elude the responsibility for that situation on the pretext that the other is free. That's his business, not mine. I am responsible for what I can do, for what I am doing. There is a convenient and false way of thinking that authorizes all abstentions, all tyrannies. Peaceful and satiated, the egoist declares, the unemployed, the prisoners, the sick, they're as free as I am. Why reject wars or misery if a man remains just as free in the worst circumstances? But only the impoverished man can declare himself free in the midst of his misery. In abstaining from helping him, I am the very face of that misery. The freedom that rejects or accepts it absolutely does not exist for me. It exists only for the one in whom it is realized. It is not in his name. It is in the name of my freedom that I can accept or reject it. In other words, it may well be ontologically true that a person is free no matter the circumstances that they find themselves in. That may be true, but I can't use that as an excuse for my behaviors of being mean or impoverishing others or harming others. It's no excuse for me to say, oh, well, they were free to accept or reject my harm or my punishments. I'm not free to shirk or slough off my responsibility for my actions. I impoverished. I harmed. I'm part of the facticity of that person. And there's no denying that except in bad faith. I am part of that other person's situation or condition in which they have to exercise their freedom to deal with what facticity has brought their way, including my own behavior. So it seems to some superficial readers of existentialists that they, in promoting this idea of absolute freedom, have completely obliterated the idea of responsibility. The existentialists think it's just the opposite. I am absolutely responsible because I am absolutely free. Because I'm absolutely free. Dostoevsky, again quoting Beauvoir, Dostoevsky said that each person is guilty for everything before everyone. Immobile or in action, we always weigh upon the earth. Every refusal is a choice. Every silence has a voice. I put that in red because that should be in a song. That line is so good it should be in a song. Every refusal is a choice. Every silence has a voice. Our very passivity is willed. In order to not choose, we still must choose not to choose. It is impossible to escape action and choice and decision, and therefore it is impossible to escape responsibility, full responsibility. Beauvoir and Sartre, in many ways, resemble in their thoughts an idea of Kant, who you will see Beauvoir criticizes shortly. But Kant said in his moral theory and deontology, one of the formulas of the categorical imperative was, in effect, act in such a way that you consider yourself a moral lawgiver. In other words, whatever you do, think of that as writing the laws of right and wrong. By your doing it, you're saying this kind of thing is right. Right? By refraining, you're saying this kind of thing is morally acceptable. They're doing the same thing here. Sartre says, I'm fully responsible for myself. Beauvoir agrees, I'm fully responsible for myself. And I'm fully responsible for the whole world at the same time. That might not be something you see coming when you're reading Sartre. In Kant, why am I responsible for everybody in the whole world? Because what I'm responding to in everyone in the whole world is the same thing that I find in myself, this idea of rationality with a capital R, that is the moral lawgiver, the condition of possibility of morality. It's something in me and you, therefore we're equally worthy of respect, but in, as we'll see, a kind of an abstract way. Sartre and Beauvoir, much more concrete about this. My example, and I'm not proud, and there's a lot to be said about this, it'd be worth a whole lecture, is the cost of the pair of jeans that I'm wearing right now. I might get them for $10 at the bargain department store here, and the only reason I can get these jeans for $10. When the cloth itself, if I tried to buy the same number of yards of cloth it takes to make a pair of jeans, would cost me more than the pair of jeans. The only way I can get that is because there's a sweatshop somewhere over there on the other side of the world where I can't see it, where people are working without the safeguards of OSHA, occupational safety standards that we would demand if you and I were working in a factory like that. They don't have that. They work in a very risky situation on very poor pay, and it's only because of that I can buy these inexpensive jeans. And I might tell myself something. I might try to puff myself up and say, well, you know what? I believe in the virtue of thrift. I'm not going to waste lots of money on fancy brand name jeans. These jeans cover my legs just as much as a fancy expensive jeans are. Aren't I being thrifty? Aren't I being a no logo kind of guy? Aren't I morally virtuous? Fact is, to be that kind of morally virtuous, I have to have a kind of a vice, a disposition to allow the suffering of others in order to make it possible for me not only to have genes that I can afford, but to have some kind of pride in my great virtue of thrift. This is the kind of thing that Sartre and Beauvoir call us to task for, and reminding us that we are always, in every moment, responsible, not just for ourselves and how we do things, but everything else in the world that I am at least tacitly saying yes to in order to pursue my projects of, for instance, being able to wear jeans that I can afford. And, by the way, those very expensive, $200 jeans are made in those same factories. So none of us are escaping. I guess what we'd have to do is try to find, jeans made in an economy that we ourselves live in. I don't know. Have I done? I've not done it. Okay, so I say this with a kind of shame, but it's something that goes on for all of us, and that's the challenge of the radical responsibility that Sartre and Beauvoir are teaching. Now, in the section on communication, here is the aforementioned critique of Kantian ethics. She writes on 127, "What is good for different men differs." That's the one thing when you studied deontology, and maybe you were talking about whether it's ever morally justified to lie. Kant's answer was always the same. No, it's never morally justified to lie. That is the truth for all human beings, no matter what, no matter their situation, no matter if even the whole world would benefit from your telling a lie. We would be happier. It doesn't matter. Lying is wrong, period, for everybody, no matter what. But Beauvoir likes to say, working for some often means working against others. One cannot stop at this tranquil solution, wanting the good of all men. We must define our own good. The error of Kantian ethics is to have claimed to make an abstraction of our own presence in the world. Therefore, it leads only to abstract formulas. The formulas of the categorical imperative. The respect of the human person in general cannot suffice to guide us because we are dealing with separate and opposed individuals. Kant's not a realist. Kant is utopian. Kant is abstract. Kant is absolute in the sense of pulled away from where we actually stand in a world, in a particular place, at a particular time, in a particular condition. And Kantian ethics for Beauvoir is unhelpful. And I think if you've done any thought experiments with Kantian ethics, you may have found it unhelpful as well. Well, I understand what he's saying, but I'm not sure I can apply this. There's different people, there's exceptions. He never takes any of that stuff into consideration. So Beauvoir, though, she is anti-utopian, and I'll leave it to you to read on 127 her idea about our preferences. But we have to prefer. We are incapable of having preferences if we pretend that we like everything. She says effectively we like nothing. If you try to stand everywhere, you're just going to be standing nowhere. Literally, the word utopia, you is a kind of equivalent of an alpha privative. It's a non or a not prefix. Topos means place. Literally, utopian thought is no place at all. It's supposed to be applicable to all of us. It's supposed to be impartial. And listen, we think impartiality is important, don't we? If you go down to a courthouse, you'll see often a statue of Justice. And Justice is standing there and she's holding the scales, and the prosecutors and the defense, they put their evidence in the scales and they just weigh it up. But the one feature of Justice with her scales is that she's blindfolded. She's not looking at who's putting the evidence there, just objectively, dispassionately, impartially weighing the evidence. And Beauvoir is wondering whether that ideal of impartiality, of objectivity, is not really an abstraction. Does justice really get done if we don't take into account reality? And reality is made of singularities, of particularities, of individuals, not abstract thing called people or groups of people with different labels. No, justice should be attached to the real. It's got to, and the real is always from a place, from some place, not no place, not every place, some place, from a situation, from a condition. Kantian and utilitarian ethics, the ethics that come from Mill, that says you should always do that which promotes the greatest good for the greatest number. Who cares who's in that number? Right? Pleasures are interchangeable. You're just weighing them up. And those kind of philosophical ethics, even though they may disagree with each other, always see us as just another one of the same, interchangeable. And the one thing existentialists teach is that we are not interchangeable, that each one of us is utterly unique. Even Heidegger, who says that our ontological default mode is the they self, which is nobody in particular, which is just another one. Anxiety is also part of his ontological analysis. It says that there is something, on the other hand, that's always bubbling under the surface, threatening to come up, especially if you take a philosophy course or you find yourself in the midst of, I don't know, say a global pandemic, something that bubbles up and disrupts that they self and tells you, helps you see that that's a construction, a way, a coping way that we live. But what we know is we are not just another one of the same, and we are not just a nobody. And that's what existentialist thought helps us to recognize. Beauvoir completely rejects that idea. She says, but it is true that I am just anyone only in the eyes of others. But ethics cannot demand from me that I realize this foreign point of view. If you were to try to just think, I'm just another one of everybody else. I am completely interchangeable, a cog in a machine, that's it. She says that would be to cease being me. And that would mean to cease being at all. I am in situation before the other and before the situations in which he finds himself. And that is exactly why I can and must prefer and desire. Now the next thing she brings up is this, in French, négatités, defined as kind of lacks or voids. Simplify it with a question. Are we here to fill a hole, to fill a role, a void? Is there a U-shaped hole out there in reality that you're just trying to meander your way towards so you could plug in like a piece of a puzzle? Is that it? She says, think about our technology. For example, she doesn't use an example, I'm using an example, like the smartphone. Was there a smartphone-shaped void in reality that needed to be filled? In other words, did it come into existence to fill a need, or was the need generated by the existence of the smartphone? Somebody made one, and all of a sudden we all needed them. I used to drive with my friends when we were your age, you young folks. We used to drive around, go wherever, go at night, no GPS, no phone, no way of contacting anybody. We went everywhere, did everything. It never occurred to us that, what we would need is a smartphone and a camera and take selfies of everything we're doing. And don't give me an okay boomer on that. I'm just saying that's the way it was. There was no need. We didn't sit around going, wow, we could really be having a good time here. If only somebody would invent some kind of little thing that you could hold in your hand and we could, send messages back and forth even though we're sitting right next to each other. Wouldn't that be great? No one thought that. Somebody developed the technology and marketed that technology to us to the point where we all feel like we need not just a smartphone, but a new one every 2 years when our contracts are up. Well, the same thing with yourself. Does the world have a crying need for you? She wants to ask. We want to think that the world has a crying need for us. There's something within us that wants to be somebody, not just somebody, but somebody necessary, somebody meaningful. But she wants to know whether the right metaphor is a seeking of yourself, is seeking the right kind of word we want to use here, or better, should we say, making our place in the world, making our attempts at necessity, making our attempts at meaning. Is it something we do or something we find? And she's arguing that if we look at it wrong, if we look at it as if we're here to try to fill a hole that pre-exists, we will be very possibly cheating ourselves. We will have assumed what that hole looks like before we get there, and we will have shaped ourselves into some kind of fantastic understanding of what that hole might look like. What are we missing? Are we denying a certain freedom to become what we might, to have access to all of our possibilities, if we assume that there's some predestined destination of our lives and our journeys? So this word negatite, it means, it's French, it means a void or a lack or an absence, and is a really big deal in Sartre's book Being and Nothingness. And he has a really great example early on in the book where he talks about where does negation, where does negativity come from? And it's a discussion for another day, but I'll just mention it to you if you get a chance to take a look at Sartre's great book Being and Nothingness. He talks about he's got an appointment at 4 o'clock to meet his friend Pierre at a cafe, and he's running late. And when he gets there, he's worried the whole time. It's Pierre. He's always prompt. Will he wait for me? And he gets to the cafe, and there's no Pierre. And he's trying to talk about the phenomenology of that. How does that appear? What's going on when he goes into a cafe and he experiences that Pierre's not there? Is he experiencing negativity, or does the negativity, Pierre's not here, only come because, Sartre makes a statement, he makes a judgment of a certain kind? That's what most people think, because how in the world can you experience a lack or an absence or a void? How in the world would you ever do that? You can experience what's there, what's being, but how would you experience nothing? So nothing has to be some kind of just something you say, something you think. But Sartre says, no, that's not really what happens. When I go into that cafe, there's nothing but being there. And I get that at first. There's the bar and the sounds and the clinking of the glasses and the teaspoons and the murmur of the people talking and maybe some music playing in the background. And in his day, there was clouds of smoke. But he says, I'm looking for Pierre. The whole experience of the cafe sort of recedes back into nothing really, nothing particular, because it's all what it is, which is nothing in particular, vis-a-vis Pierre, who's not there. His not being there is as real as the coffee cups and the espresso machines and the waiter and the people and the jukebox. It's just as real as all of that. And he says, well, where is that coming from? And basically he traces it back to our own consciousness. Were there not consciousness, the being of the cafe wouldn't recede back into nothingness, a backdrop against which the absence of Pierre shows itself. And the absence of Pierre can't have the reality that it does without consciousness. So the title Being and Nothingness of Sartre's book, the nothingness refers to consciousness, to us, to what he calls the For itself, what Heidegger calls the Dasein, which is not a thing. It's a negator, it's a annihilator in a certain way. Now don't panic, it's not nihilism, it's not saying there's no meaning, but meaning couldn't happen at all without this aspect of consciousness, which in itself is nothing. It has no thingness about it. And there's a lot to be said about that, but I just wanted to take a moment here. Maybe this would be a tiny bit of fun for you to talk about Gestalt, a German word. It's just a little conceptual interlude here, but it's about the idea of figure and ground. The cafe, it's real. There's all kinds of things there, but none of that is anything. And the people, none of that is anything. And it's not just that, there are lots of people who are not in that cafe. Mick Jagger wasn't in the cafe. Donald Trump wasn't in the cafe. None of that had anything to do with Sartre's experience of looking Pierre. Pierre was not there, and Pierre was making the cafe what it was, and the cafe served as the backdrop or the ground for the figure of this absent Pierre. So there's visual ways to explain Gestalt, and maybe you've seen some of these before. What do you see here? What do you see in this picture? Well, some people look at this and they see a vase, a candlestick, or a vase, a black vase. Other people see two faces facing each other, nose to nose almost, lip to lip almost. Here's the trick: you can't see them both at the same time. Maybe now that I've pointed them out, you've seen the faces, or maybe you've seen the candlestick. But you can't see both face and candlestick at the same time. In order to see the candlestick, you can't see the faces. In order to see the faces, you're not seeing candlestick. And if you were to change the shape of the candlestick, the faces would change. Or if you were to change the shape of the faces, the candlestick would change. They're interconnected and inextricable. You can't take them apart. And what Sartre's saying about our being in the world, and Beauvoir would agree about this, is that let's stick with the faces for the second. The dark would be the ground for that against which the faces show up. If you took that dark away, you just have a big white square. There would be no faces whatsoever. So without that dark patch in this image right here, you couldn't have any faces. The faces are a figure on the ground of that dark background. Or flip it. If you just wanted to look at the vase, if you tried to take away all the white areas of this image and it was just all the same color dark, you would not have any vase at all. You'd see nothing but a big dark patch. So without a ground, there's no figure. Without a screen, there's nothing that can be projected upon that. And what our human being is a projection, a figure on a ground. But as the background changes, so does the figure. So as our circumstances and conditions change, as they have radically done in recent weeks for us, who we are also radically changed, because who we are is how we respond or appear against the ground of our being in the world. Here's another one, just for fun. I'll be quiet for just a sec, let you look at that. Think to yourself what you might see here in this picture. Maybe what you see is an older looking woman wearing a mink with her chin, big long chin, down in the collar of her mink, wearing some kind of scarf with a kind of a tomahawky kind of nose, or maybe you see a young woman with a very delicate cheek line, looking away from us, her tiny little nose pointed out to the left there, the eyelash for her left eye above that, her little ear right about the center of the picture. Which do you see? Well, whatever you see, and they're both there, but you either see one or you see the other, and you could alternate if you catch it, if you could see both of them, but you could only see one. And if we adjusted the young woman's cheekbone, we would be adjusting the old woman's nose. Or if we adjusted her nose, we'd be adjusting her cheek line. If we adjusted the young woman's choker collar, we'd be adjusting the older woman's mouth. The things can only show up as figures against the ground, and that includes us. So our being is inextricably interconnected with the world and with others. The they comes up in Beauvoir's talk. There's some worthy comparisons between what she and Sartre think about the they compared to Heidegger. What Beauvoir points out is really interesting is that we esteem the they more than our own intimates. We take advice, praise, blame from strangers more quickly than from those we know. I get this all the time. My wife might tell me 12 times, you know what, you should take some B12. You should take some B12. B12 would be a good vitamin to take. You should take B. I'm like, yeah. And then all of a sudden one day I'll be, surfing around, I'll come across a story about how good B12 is. I say, hon, this B12 seems like it's pretty good. She's like, I've been telling you forever. Now, I know her. I love her. I know her as well as any human being. Some stranger, whoever, who wrote an article, I don't know who they are. I don't know what their credentials are. I don't know anything. But it's out there. It's out there in the world. And I think, oh, well, maybe that's more important. If I write a book and my mom says, "Boy, this is really a great book," I don't care. But if some stranger on the other side of the world writes a review of my book saying it's a pretty good book, I don't even know who that person is. I love that. That's some stranger who's just out there, who's not, connected with me in any way whatsoever, says they like my book. Somehow that means more to me. And I think Beauvoir may have a point about this. She quotes this line, no man is a hero to his valet. The valet is the guy, well, we don't have valets. I certainly don't have valet. That's your dresser. It's somebody who gets you out the door in the morning, one of your household servants. The guy the valet is dressing may to the world look like the greatest, person, highest virtue, very important, very respected. The valet knows everything. Seen him in his underwear, so he's not really that impressed. Same thing might happen, like I write a book and the whole world's like, "You know what, your book is really great. It's a fantastic book." My brothers aren't going to say that to me. They're just going to give me the same you-know-what that they always give me when we hang out together. They don't care what the rest of the world thinks. They've seen me. They know the guy I really am, not just somebody whose name is on a best-selling book or a well-received book. So it's interesting, our relation to others, and it seems it's odd, and I think she points out a lot of that. Other people matter to us, but it is complicated, how they matter and how we have to think about those relationships. I think we talked early in the semester, image that comes from the philosopher Hegel, who we talked about, the philosopher that Kierkegaard had such a hard time with. This idea of the master-slave dialectic, the master is free, the slave is in bondage. But then when you think about it, you got to ask, well, how come the master has to have guns and dogs? Well, that's because the slave really is a freedom. And the master knows that without the slave, the master's no master at all, but just a guy, maybe a broke guy. So the master has to do everything to make sure the slave continues to view the master as master. The slave, is in bondage, but the slave knows, hey, I'm the one doing all this work here. I'm the one that's bringing all the value to this economy, and the first chance I get, I might be out of there. So the slave has some power over the master. The master is in some ways enslaved to that relationship with the slave. Hegel's point is freedom comes because it's possible for both master and slave to recognize the contradiction of slavery and to overcome it, as I hope we've been trying to do. Sartre, again, in this amazing book, Being in Nothingness, it talks about what he calls the look. And the look is something that tells me, against Descartes, that there are other people in the world. He gives the example of a jealous lover who's in a hallway of an apartment building and outside the door of an apartment, peering through the keyhole, trying to spy on his lover, seeing if his lover's having an affair, and looking in the keyhole, and the only thing that's in the consciousness of that jealous lover is what's going on inside that apartment that he's viewing through the keyhole. When all of a sudden he hears footsteps coming down the hall and turns and sees somebody, a stranger, somebody he doesn't know, looking at him, objectifying him, turning him into the peeping Tom that he is at that moment, turning him into an object. You don't have to prove the existence of the external world, Sartre says. You could feel it right away in shame. And other people do that to us. They turn us into objects. We turn us into facticity. We're not only facticity because we're able to transcend that, what people have turned us into, but people will turn us into things. They'll label us. They'll put interpretations upon us that we may not want or think are fair, but if they do it, it's been done. They've turned us into those kind of things. It's very complicated. Sartre says in his play No Exit, hell is other people, and by saying hell is other people, he's not saying being with other people is always bad, or people are always bad, or that being around people is like being tossed into a lake of fire. He doesn't mean it like that. In fact, he says, my version of hell is a lot nicer than the church's version of hell. All I'm saying is that other people are freedoms too. They're transcendences too. There's nothing determining how an other in their freedom will regard me, how they will look at me, how they will label me. and they may label me and regard me in such a way that throws up an obstacle to my own projects. Wouldn't it be great if all you had to do to get something is to want something? Wouldn't that be fantastic? If you want to be a superhero rock star, you just say, I want to be a superhero rock star. That's who I am, ladies and gentlemen. So therefore, regard me as a superhero rock star. Wouldn't it be great if they all went, great, fantastic, you're a superhero rock star? That's not how it goes, is it? I could say that, I'm a superhero rock star, and people will laugh. In particular, my brothers, right? They know I might aspire to that. That might be my project. But if others in their freedom choose not to regard me that way, I'm not that way. However much I want, I'm ambiguous. I'm free, but I'm determined by the regard of others. Existentialism is a philosophy of action. It's a philosophy of doing. It's not nihilism. It's a philosophy of choice and decision. But it's not selfishness. And so she wants to make this point. She says the idea of self-interest is based on the idea of a ready-made self toward which the subject that I am would transcend itself. That's trying to find me up the road somewhere. Taking it for a supreme end. The self, this ready-made self, is the goal. It's the absolute supreme end or aim of life. That's where selfishness comes from, but that's based on a wrong understanding of ourselves. Instead of throwing myself through my projects towards different ends of a self that doesn't exist anywhere as a given. And we talked in the first part of, I introduced some Buddhist idea of the no self, of the impermanence of the self. Well, here's Beauvoir agreeing with that. This you don't exist in the sense of something over and done with and finished, whether now or up the road that you're trying to get to. That's not the kind of thing you are. Exist in Heidegger's sense means I am always outside of whatever it is that I or others have determined me to be, what my actualities happen to be. I am always transcending that, always moving beyond that in my possibilities. So it's not a selfishness that she's talking about here, where there is some set thing that's already been determined that you're defending against all attacks. That's selfishness, and she thinks that's actually futile in the long run. Selfishness is a form of bad faith. It's believing something that you know not to be true, that you are a self-determined thing and you know that's not true because you know you could choose otherwise. No matter how much you tell yourself there's no getting around it, I had no choice, it is what it is, you know, it's in there because you are freedom, because you're transcendence. You know that is not true. That's bad faith. So she says, all right, so boiling this all down, there's two conditions for genuine human relations. One, I must be free to make my appeal to others as I make myself. I have to be free to choose, to decide, to act, and appeal to others to give me, like my grandkids want, give me that validation. I have to appeal to them to give me that validation so that I can be me. But two, I must be among others who are free for me, who can freely respond, and that means freely reject my appeal. If I try to make other people see me the way they want to be seen, that's tyrannical and it never really works. It never really is satisfying. God, for instance, could have made us all to just adore and praise him all, and whatever he had made that just would adore and praise him all day long would not be human, because we wouldn't be free, and that adoration would be phony. It would just be some kind of wind-up toy making sounds like, oh, I adore you, oh, I adore you. No. So the human life for Beauvoir is a kind of risk. It's a kind of danger, because I need others to validate and legitimate my life. You can't be an island unto yourself. But on the other hand, you can't control what other people in their freedom are going to do about you and about your works and about your projects and about the things that you're trying to accomplish. But if you tried in some ways to fix it so they would have to respond the way you want, you soon, she argues, would feel the phoniness of that. Sycophants, people who suck up to people. You're a famous rock star. Everybody's nice to you, and everybody says good things to you, and everybody validates you. To a certain point, you think, what? They're hangers on. They're just hanging on. I want them. I want them to genuinely be able to take me or leave me, but they take me anyway. But these people, they don't have anything else. They're just taking me. They're along for the ride because they're not doing anything with their lives, so they're riding my train. That's dissatisfying. It's unsatisfying to me. She can't let go of the idea of violence here. She says, in one sense, violence is not an evil because she says, we talked about this, so you can't really do anything for or against another person. I think that's worth, pondering whether that's certainly true or not. Worth thinking about, but we've heard her out now. Her idea that no, we can never reach anything but the facticity of others, but we can't really get to them, to freedom, to transcendence. Can't really make anybody do anything. You can't make them happy. You can't make them sad. But again, you're responsible for everything you do that they, in their freedom, choose to be happy or sad about. That's the ambiguity. But we have to have others. But the others have to be free. So she says, even though when you work for some, you work against others. Even though violence is probably an inescapable feature of the world, it is always the mark of a failure. It's always the mark of failure. The logic of violence is thus, she says, we are condemned to failure because we're condemned to violence. And we're condemned to violence because men are separate and free and in conflict. They have different projects. The jailer and the jailed have different projects. The capitalist and the worker have different projects. And they conflict, right? Each is freedom, transcendence, and at the same time, facticity and or an object for others. That tension seems inevitable to lead to some kind of violence, whether it's physical or even emotional. And she basically thinks it's inescapable, but it's a sign of failure, so we're condemned to failure. But, quoting Maurice Blanchot, the most important thing he says is not to lose. Right? That's what we want to do. Don't lose. He says, but we can never win. And Beauvoir thinks that's right. You never finally totally win. It's never over for us. As long as there's breath in our bodies, there's more possibilities, there's more transcendence for us, there's more freedom to be exercised, more choices to be made, more possibilities. You want to try not to lose, but you never finally get an ultimate victory, she says. This is a great line for students, not only students, sometimes profs. We live in a state of indefinite procrastination. What does that mean? What we're always doing, we're always choosing, but we never really can get there. You can't want to not. You can't want to get there because there would be over. You don't want it to be over. You want it to keep going. You want to live. You want to choose life, as the Bible would say. French philosopher who was influenced but critical of existentialists, Jacques Derrida, died a number of years ago now, had this idea of messianism. You heard the Messiah, that's going to come, this idea of to come. And Derrida points this out as something, not just a religious idea, but to use a word he wouldn't use, an ontological idea, something in the nature of being. Think about the Jewish belief that the Messiah will come. The Messiah is going to come. And Jesus, to people of his time, a number of people's time, thought he had come. The Messiah had come. The fulfillment of the promise had come to the earth and was here. And what's the next thing he has to do? Leave. So all of Christianity is also come again. You got to wait till he comes. If you can read Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, a book I've mentioned already in class, the Grand Inquisitor. Jesus comes back, and the church snatches him up and says, "You can't come out here. You can't come now. You'll mess everything up. We're in charge here. You can't." It would not make any sense to anybody for you to come, because what would it mean? What would it mean if Jesus came down from the clouds today? you'd have to ask yourself, well, what could that look like? What would that mean? No, it's just like what she said about heaven, a place, where nothing ever happens. It's not human. We would not know what it means. We would not be able to understand that or grasp that. We always have to live in a state of procrastination, a state of expectation, of anticipation, to use Heidegger's preferred word. That's us. That's the kind of being we are. There's risk, there's conflict, maybe even violence, but it's not nihilism. It doesn't mean there's no meaning. Beauvoir said on an ontological level, yeah, there's no meaning. On a cosmic level, there's no meaning of your life or my life. That doesn't mean our lives have no meaning. Meaning comes from our projects. Meanings come from our choices and our desires, and we are choosing desiring beings. That's what we are. That's why there will always be meaning to life. There's not an absolute meaning. There's not a meaning that's resting on something, a firm foundation. There's meaning that means everything to us. The meaning you have with the love of your family and your friends and the desires for your career and your aesthetic goals for beauty and joy in your life, that means everything to you. It doesn't mean nothing. It doesn't change anything because the stars in a few 100 million or billion years will burn out. It doesn't change anything for you. Your life has meaning, but because you give it meaning, because you choose to give it meaning, because you make the meaning. That's where the meaning comes from, and that's all the meaning there is. But that means everything.